Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of Sit Around the Fire. I'm really looking forward to bringing you this conversation today because it was, in fact, with one very famous Mr. Whiskey. And yes, that's 100% correct. You heard me right, Mr. Whiskey. He is the founder of Couple of Nukes, and he's the host of the Couple of Nukes podcast. He's a northern boy turned southern man, an entrepreneur, a U.S. Navy veteran. In fact, he's a former electrician's mate nuclear. And he is on this mission through his own inspiration to lead these conversations and dive into these different fields, things like mentorship, faith, military matters, mental health, addiction, suicide prevention, fitness, health, business, and so much more. He's really such a dynamic force, and it was such a fun time having a conversation with him on the episode. In fact, he showed up to the episode wearing the most epic black cowboy hat, which I just think is amazing. So, enjoy this conversation, my friends, as we sit down and sit around the fire with Mr. Whiskey himself. All right, well, welcome to the show, Mr. Whiskey. We are so excited to have you here on Sit Around the Fire and really looking forward to what the conversation has to hold and how it sounds like we're pretty aligned with our missions and the work that we're doing. So I'm really excited and honored to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to spread value and resources. And I come from a home of first responders. My grandfather was a fire captain, and my father was a police officer for 25 years. And then, I served in the military, and a lot of people in my family in general, both my younger sisters are military. So I think that communities are very interconnected. A lot of first responders are former military or adjacent, and a lot of them also have the same issues when it comes to suicide, to addiction, to sleep health, and to a lot of the mental health issues that go on. So I think it's really important that we help serve one another within those two communities.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that I definitely want to dive into today with the suicide and addiction particularly, but and sleep, as that's always a hot topic within our worlds. But yeah, I'm very excited. Can you spend some time introducing yourself so our audience knows who you are and maybe a piece of your story?
For sure. And in terms of first responder, one of the things that I think is so important is you know, particularly in the case of police officers, being a child of a police officer in this day and age is quite different than I would say many years ago. I think there's been a lot of movements, unfortunately, villainizing the police force, and it's become a very political topic rather than public safety. And as a result, I grew up with people automatically hating me just because of who my father was. They say a good rule of thumb is never, police in the town you're raising your family. I think that's a great rule of thumb because I, personally experienced the consequences of that, which was, I was the son of a police officer. I wasn't Mr. Whiskey. I was just this labeled based off of that, and so unfortunately that kind of affected my childhood. My father, because of his time on the police force, suffered from alcoholism, especially he was part of a wave of experiments with sleep. I do talk about sleep a lot because part of the military and first responder force is the rotating shift work in most cases, most bases, wherever you're stationed at. My father went through a trial period where they were trying to find out what was best for the first responders, and it put a heavy strain on his body and everyone he worked with. At one point he was one whole month of days, one whole month of nights, one whole month of days, one whole month of nights. And at some point it was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They went through these different rotations, 12-hour shifts. And so one of the big things we always talk about when it comes to first responder mental and physical health is retirement. It's a pivotal moment, just like the military. If you have done 20 or more years, or even if you've done 5 to 10 years, it can really affect your identity, especially if you join fresh out of high school. It kind of becomes who you are rather than an occupation. It's hard though, and I can understand having lived it, that keeping it as an occupation when it takes up so much of your lifestyle, when you are called in, working on holidays, weekends, when you are living with the people you work with sometimes, it's
Hmm.
hard to make it just a occupation. But because of that, it really affects a person's identity to a core level. And so retirement, oftentimes, if first responders or military veterans do not, adjust their lifestyle properly, which includes maybe getting another job and purpose and identity, exploring a business opportunity, or getting just hobbies and having a plan, a lot of them will actually pass away almost mysteriously within the next few years, typically from heart conditions or get it thrown into the midst of, addiction. And so my father, when he retired at the same exact time of that huge life change after 25 years of police service, his mother passed away. And he was one of
Wow.
those gentlemen where he saw his mother every single day. They had a super close relationship. So you have this pivotal moment in his career in mental and physical health combined with a passing of a family member. And so that's really what fueled his addiction. And then between his addiction and then my mother's just wicked nature, the two made a terrible household. And it was one of conformity and control. To highlight that, I'd like to share the fact that, I wasn't allowed to use a stove. It was too dangerous. I had actually operated safely a nuclear reactor and an electrical system of a submarine before I had ever used a stove.
Oh my
We got off the
gosh.
submarine in port and we're at our house and one of my military buddies is like, "Hey, Mr. Whiskey, can you go start the stove for us?" I was like, "I don't know how to operate it." And they're like, "What do you mean? You just
Wow.
came off a nuclear submarine doing all kinds of stuff." And I was like, "It was too dangerous." Part of that influence was the first responder force. As a police officer, my father, as I've gotten older and as he's gotten more drunk, he has shared and opened up about that. My father definitely has. A lot of people have said he has undiagnosed PTSD and different mental health conditions that, he's never admitted to. But hearing some of the stories of what he went through, people don't realize. Nowadays they have this political image that all police officers do is kill black people, and that's not at all the truth. In fact, if you look at the statistical chances of being shot while unarmed as a black individual, it's is not this thing that they hype it up to be. Regardless, what people fail to realize is that outside of that political image and then traffic violations, police officers respond to suicides, to murders, to violent crimes. My father has dragged dead bodies, downstairs. He has performed CPR on dying infants. It is like first responder is more than just traffic law and order. Like it is, you are the first responder. You are the first person there when the scene is chaotic. Same with EMTs when they get to car crashes. I've interviewed them on my show, seeing some horrific, horrific scenes. Same with firefighters. You first responder, you're the first person there, which means everything is chaos, everything is ugly and grotesque and mentally scarring. And so I think part of the conformity and control was just a fear of what the world was out there. But I think it's important as a first responder or military member who's witnessed that not to isolate into a bubble of protection, but to raise with strong mental and physical health and an understanding and education of what the world is like to be suited for it. I think preparation rather than protection is actually much more important. And so to wrap that all up, that kind of is what propelled me into the military as my parents kind of were controlling individuals. The world was at a strange time with COVID happening. It just started as I was graduating high school. Didn't even actually graduate because of, the COVID had just been discovered and everything got shut down. And so I ended up into the nuclear Navy, where there I experienced pretty much a similar environment to home, but far more abusive and less rights as a human being, witnessing terrible leadership, toxic work culture environments, and a slew of suicide attempts and just suicide in general, mental health crisis that was so bad the retention and recruiting was terrible. They were offering $180,000 in a rank up in a 2 year short tour just to keep nukes. And nuclear operators would wear paper clips on their uniform, and that stood for people against people ever re-enlisting civilian life is preferred. Because nukes are smart
Wow.
and they'll make up stuff like that. I didn't make it up, but um, $180,000, 2 year short tour, and a rank up. Anyone in the military would jump at that. But the mental health and the work conditions were so bad that nuclear operators, no, they started this trend of saying no. And so, it was just terrible. And the worst part is that everything I witnessed and experienced is not new. I've interviewed Vietnam veterans, 9/11 era veterans, everything going on in the Middle East, even in Korea, South America. I've They've guested on my show. I've interviewed them. And half of the complaints are the same, half of the concerns are the same, half of the circumstances are the same. What that means is we're not seeing change. We're seeing it in some degrees very slowly. But because the military, which is supposed to be a neutral organization, does indeed follow a political cycle instead, you had this constant throwing back and forth where no progress ever happens. I mean, it's the same with America in general. Every president is undoing what the last president did, so it's
Yeah.
just this constant cycle of us getting jerked around in the middle.
Wow. There's so much to unpack within all of that. I love it so much because you you bring such a unique perspective to the table that we don't often get to hear about with like people who have grown up in a family of first responders or having that and what that was like and that whole dynamic of being sheltered or protected or living really under the mask of fear all the time, like fear of the worst things that can possibly happen. And I think you're spot on with the identity piece. It's a lot of work that I do with individuals too, is separating this identity of this cannot be your only thing. Like it cannot be you are, Ashley, the firefighter paramedic is you have to have an identity that is not that because as we all know, it could be gone in an instant for one, but also it really leaves you with nothing. And I don't think people often understand that. And I don't know if that's a case in the military as well, if you see that like similarly with this
100%.
attachment to identity, but can you give us a perspective from that side?
For sure. I've seen it, I've interviewed people on my show who have shared their firsthand accounts, and a lot of military members, especially ones who were in for a long time or had a very strong tie to that job or that identity, actually ended up going on like a journey. Like many of them moved to another country or state and kind of just tried to figure it out. A lot of them, or unfortunately, a lot of them took their own life from, the people I've interviewed who knew them, and it's a shame. Part of it too is one of the biggest things I've seen military to civilian transition is a lack of transferability. And so I've had people on my show who they were Marine sniper riflemen or they were rocket launcher, weapon users. And it's like they got out and they kind of had nothing going for them. They had been in the military, but people were like, but you don't know how to do anything that is, applicable in our society. And so I've seen that be a huge struggle. Some of my friends got out. They were excited. Mr. Whiskey, every day they were telling me for 6 years, I can't wait to get out and, do XYZ. And then they get out and they're depressed. They've had, my buddies, he's already had like 5 or 6 different jobs within just like 4 to 5 months. Just
Wow.
cannot fit into the civilian world. And you know, part of it is my language doesn't help, referring to it as the civilian world and seeing us as a different step from it. We're at the end of the day, we're people. And it's been especially in my generation and the generations below me, the idea of men in the military are pretty villainized. We're called baby killers and murderers, and we're literally trained to kill and for war. And people have such a wartime combat deployed image of the military. And that's part of the issue with the mental health resources and identity and everything. So much focus goes into combat veterans, and they are vital, don't get me wrong, but they are statistically a very small portion of the military population. A majority of the military is not actively deployed, and if they are, it's not in the combat zone. Right? You have thousands of people on every aircraft carrier doing non-combat missions. So when we focus so much on combat PTSD and not mental health and military matters in general, you kind of lose grasp of all these people who are struggling. For me, growing up in a controlling, conforming household, I didn't really develop as a person. I didn't really have an identity. It was just like, I am the child of ABC and XYZ, and I do as told. Then you get into the military and you're petty officer so and so or chief so and so or whatever your rank and name is, and then it's like that becomes your identity. And then you get out and it's like, who am I now? And in my case, in the case of many people who joined when they were 17, 18, or 19, they've never had the time to grow and self-develop. In the military, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily always leave a lot of time for you to develop as an individual because you are so drawn in on the mission or work. And then you also have a bunch of other people, most who don't know themselves or what they're doing, influencing you from all kinds of different walks of faith and culture and then society. It's just a mess. Your higher ups, most of them hate their lives and are miserable, and they don't mentor you right. One of my biggest missions is to help the mentorship in the military because honestly, it's just it's a hot mess of, hey, petty officer so and so, I know you got to operate the reactor all night. You've got other jobs as the quote financial expert just because we don't have an actual financial advisor and you're good with money, and you've got, your own personal life to go to. Here's 15 sailors who just joined the Navy, and we know you don't know how to mentor, but we're going to task you with leading them during your free time. So the issue is there aren't designated mentors or financial experts or fitness experts. It's always who do we already have working that we can also just add this onto their plate? And it's like, no, we need someone who's actually dedicated to this, whether it's a third party program through the VA or the government or the military itself, or if it's run by veterans for veterans, a nonprofit, whatever it may be. We need a huge improvement. If we had actual mentorship and career guidance in our fitness and finances and relationships, the military would be a much better organization because it would be of people who actually develop themselves as individuals, who actually have healthy, fruitful relationships and careers instead of just a mess of miserable people who hate each other, hate their lives, and aren't growing as people outside of their identity of hate. See, one of my big things that I had in the military was I don't want my personality to be hating the military. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who
Yeah.
their personality is literally just hating the military well after they retire. It's just story after story of how the military screwed us over. I bring up those stories on my show and in conversation as a means of, making change and impact. But I've done a lot of work to ensure that, hating the military wasn't my personality. Being in the military wasn't my personality. And even serving the military audience isn't my whole life. I think it's so important to develop outside of those. But so many people fall into that trap of, the military is my life. And as I mentioned earlier, it's difficult to. You're constantly inundated with it, especially if you're living on a ship. You get off of work and you're in your civilian clothes and you're trying to relax, watch TV, and a chief walks by and starts asking you about your qualifications. So there's like a difficult balance of that separation. And unfortunately, this pushes unfruitful relationships because people want to get off the ship or off the base. And so they marry people at an exceedingly excessive rate to get the housing benefits to escape that environment. And then they have a terrible divorce or domestic violence or sexual assault. And it's just a bad time. The military needs to be set up more as a job than a lifestyle while still having mission, preparedness and being ready at the forefront of it. But living at the job doesn't have to be the constant case, especially stateside and base side. On deployment on ships, yes, that's a different story, but Bayside, I think we should do as much as we can to pre-start the self-development and separation of multiple identities. But the military is kind of set up to just make it your life and put
Mm-hmm.
it before everything. And it does so in a toxic, unhealthy way.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when I hear you talk about like, being in your civilian clothes and wanting to just watch TV and be like quote unquote normal, normal person. But then like you still have people, officers or whoever coming up and like you're never really off when you're off. And I think
Hmm.
that's definitely relatable to a lot of different like military, but also first responders as well too, is like you're never really off. It even if you're not necessarily there at work in the squad car in the station is like there is a piece of your mind if you don't learn how to turn that off and to walk away from the job, like you're never really off. So
100%.
what are some of the things that you did then, like, or how did you recognize this within you of like, I need to have this balance. I need to like separate myself and like what were some of the things you started to notice about yourself that inspired you to start making some changes?
I really can't take credit for it. It was kind of like I kind of got thrown into the podcasting world, and that kind of developed my identity for me in terms of like what I was doing. Like obviously there's a lot of choices I've made consciously to align the mission to where I want it to be, but really like I got into podcasting to be a comedian, to just host a funny show, and then other people's expectations got thrown onto me, and the path shifted, and then I had to like kind of step back and look at what I wanted to do now that I was in that world. But that has been the biggest thing, and it's been the conversations on the show. I've learned so much from people from around the world of all different education levels and backgrounds, and I think part of identity development and understanding your life is education. And I feel like we're lacking that. I feel like the modern public education system is just a political indoctrination machine with a lack of actual knowledge. And I think that listening to podcasts and reading and studying and self research is so vital to development. But we don't have a lot of that. What we have a lot of is pre-made algorithms and programs warping our children. Our youth are being exposed to pornographic content at 8 or 9 years old. They are watching these music videos that sexualize women and, dare I say, gangsterfy, for lack of better words, men, and perpetuating this culture, this fictional narrative that is bad for our society. You have social media sexualizing women entirely, villainizing first responders and military members. You have this just constant loop and inundation that tells you who to be. And interestingly enough, there's so much of one culture telling you that you can choose to be anything or anyone you want, but at the same time, they're also telling you and giving you an identity in a lane and you don't even realize it. So it seems very freeing at the surface level, but when you look at it at the deeper level, all of the movies, the TV shows, the books, the changing of the education system and social media, it's all inundation. And so for young people trying to develop their identity right now, or for parents and caretakers of children wanting to know what to do, I would say the biggest thing is filtering through social media, the careful implication of it, because it can be a great, powerful thing, like the conversation you and I are having right now. But we can't trust our children to find the right resources because there are evil forces in the world inundating them and purposely targeting them. There is like TikTok, for example, has an entire psychological team designed to keep your children on the app. And some of them have quit for morality purposes because they know that they are actually working to basically enslave these children online. And so we had to go above and beyond as parents and as brothers and sisters and whoever we may be to go out of our way to help pull people from this inundation and program loop and to get them capable of independent thought and research. For me, I've always been intellectually curious, and because of the conformity I grew up in, a bit rebellious. And so it has allowed me to step outside of all these mainstream narratives and inundation. And I think it is really dependent on those who are outside of it continuing to spread that knowledge. Otherwise, eventually, we'll all end up pre-programmed. And so that is a huge part of self-development and identity is being able to step back and actually independently think when we are constantly inundated. It's the same with the military, first responders, or any career you do. You are going to be bombarded with these societal structures and concepts, these expectations, and this pressure. And it can be very hard to be an individual when you just want to, conform to the pattern of the world. But it's through the renewing of your mind that you need to resist that and become your own person in alignment with what is good and right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Do you think like some of this conformity or like I kind of see it too as like this desire for acceptance? Like a lot of people want to be accepted into the herd or they're missing that piece. And I
Right.
know that's something big within the first responder culture too, is this desire to want to belong. Sometimes when you feel like you haven't belonged before, do you think that's something that you've seen or like seen that play out in your world?
100%, especially in addiction. Most people who started drinking or doing drugs, it was because of conformity. It was because of societal pressure to fit in, to be able to, talk to a woman they liked or whatever it may have been. It is because of this negative stigma that if you are a young person and you deny alcohol or drugs, that you have an issue or there's something wrong with you. Most drinking and drug use starts as social acceptance, not an actual individual desire to participate. It is the same with a lot of the relationships we're seeing where individuals feel this pressure from society. If you're single, you're wrong. If you are a young person, why aren't you experimenting or having fun? If you're middle aged, your clock's running up, you better find a partner. If you're widowed or divorced, what are you doing? You need to move on. There are these constant societal pressures to be in a relationship, to do drugs and alcohol. Again, I think it's 100% the case. And this includes, let's say you're a first responder or a veteran and you want to be part of a community and the only one you can find that would fit into are doing things that you're not aligned with. And you had to choose between feeling like you're a part of a community again or, standing in your morality and then being alone. And so it's a tough situation. It's sad that I think that there are a lot of groups for veterans and first responders where you don't have to compromise your morality. And I think that's one of the beauties of online technology, right? Because it used to be whatever your American Legion post was or whatever first responder group you had locally. But now we have these online communities and forums where you can connect with first responders or veterans from around the world. And so there is hope in all of the darkness that I talk about. There is a lot of good connection that can come about through social media and different organizations. And so I think that you can indeed find, a place to fit in as a veteran or first responder without having to succumb to anything. It's just a matter of how hard are you willing to look and what are you willing to sacrifice and how strong is your conviction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. There's so much that wasn't available before, and access to any kind of support. You just have to keep looking and keep searching till you find the right fit for you, but not to ever give up. Like there's always some place for you to find exactly what you need. Yeah, and I love the podcasts are a huge way to support that too, is to get conversations out there and get like resonation through stories and all that kind of stuff. So that's really super cool. Um,
For
I
sure.
want to switch gears just a tad because I think that this is one thing that I definitely have spoken to a lot on the podcast, and I like to continue to bring light to it because I think even though it is improving, there's still a massive area for improvement. And honestly, part of my mission is like to end the suffering in silence. And I think when people get to the point of feeling completely hopeless that I need to end my life, there's no other way, or they're seeking this, what they believe is going to bring a sense of internal peace, that we still need to have these powerful conversations around it because the more we talk about it, like the more it's out in the open and breaking apart the stigma as we go, as you want to say. But I wonder if you can give us an idea because you have such a unique perspective. And I know we were speaking to it before we started recording, but like give us a picture of what things look like military wise with I know it's a huge problem. Like it literally epidemic standards of numbers of either current or veterans who are taking their lives, and it's equally as bad first responder side, but I think the military is a bit worse with this. But I was wondering if you can speak to like has your experience been like? What did you see, or like what message do you want to have for people moving forward so that like this is no longer a standard? Like these numbers do not continue to increase and we can make some positive changes towards that.
In terms of my experience, I've personally stopped suicides myself. I started one of my my military story starts with stopping a homicide suicide plot in boot camp. So right off the bat, before I'm even in, just a few weeks. And so it is a huge problem. There are suicides in boot camp. There are suicides at the bases. There are suicides on the ships in the missions. One of the saddest things is many people who do survive combat zones, a good portion of them will actually commit suicide later on, years after they made it out of the war zone. And, there is a huge issue. My ship had between 13 and 15 suicides and a murder within just a year and a half, three in a single week. The murder was a military man on a military woman, who both were on our ship. And so, to my knowledge, and, we had a captain who, spoke about it, cried about it, so we had a very human element there through him. But there was a lot of people who lacked that human element. One of the things with social media, going back to the inundation, we're desensitized to human life, the value of it, with these movements of killing babies are okay and the gore videos online are humorous, that we have memed death, that people just don't have the same respect for human life and death as they used to. Suicide has become a more talked about topic, and there's a lot of movements to help prevent it, yet there's so much desensitization around it. There's a lot of dark humor around killing yourself or killing others. And so there's also plenty of people who are become immune to it. It's like if there's one or three attempts a month, it just becomes a routine. I liked an interesting quote I heard once, which was like, let's say 1 to 5 deaths is a tragedy, whatever it may be. 100,000 deaths is a statistic. There comes a point with the 22 a day quote where we lose sight of the individuality, that each of those numbers is a person who was a mother, brother, son, father, sister, whatever role they played biologically in their community, in society, in the military, in the first responder world. And so I think part of the issue is we look at things so to statistically and number wise because we want the big numbers to emphasize the epidemic-like nature of this, but we lose the individuality. And I think, part of that is having the obituaries, having the pictures. I mean, seeing that these are real people, seeing their families. A lot of people are affected by a single suicide, regardless of whether you think someone would miss you or not. Statistically, there's a lot of people affected immediately. That being said, what I have come to learn is that right now we're in a day and age of, so in the military, they, at least for me, because each branch and each base has their own acronyms and suicide prevention training. Fun fact, most of those statistics you get in the military are lies. My shipmates have sent me the reports and I've reviewed them compared to what the civilian world has and what the numbers are, and it's just wrong. In fact, actually, they lied and covered up a suicide on my ship. Not, not just once, more than once. There are a lot of cover-ups when it comes to suicide in the military. I'm sure first responder side as well. Very easy, especially when you're out to sea, to say, "Oh, sailor got lost at sea." Funny because there was a giant suicide note on his rack, and he had gone to medical several times and said he needed help, and you told him to F off, and now he's dead. But funny how he just went missing during a training mission all of a sudden. Like this is a first-hand account from not too long ago. There was also just people who committed suicide, and the ship never made any public announcements about it. They kind of kept it hush hush, maybe let the division know, or people only found out because the roommate shared that their roommate had committed suicide, and the chain of command did nothing about it. And so it's a huge issue. And I think that one of the things, going back to what I was saying earlier, is we need to recognize the humanity in it. So my base put forward ask, care, treat, act. People are getting better at asking each other how their mental health is doing. It's becoming a less taboo subject. And there's a lot of treatment options nowadays. The care part is the issue. We've become a task off society. So people will say, "Hey, I'm suicidal." And people will say, "All right, here's the hotline, here's the military one resources, here's papers you can read, here's these different resources. Bye." Now, hey, I'm a sailor going through the same thing. I can talk to you, have a human conversation. right? I've had people on my show I interviewed who quit the hotlines because they had to read a script. They were not allowed to be personal, actually connect. The humanity is missing from the suicide crisis, which is so ironic because it is a human-human connection thing. Only a human can really stop another person. A robotic script isn't going to stop someone. Reading these, if I'm going to commit suicide and you email me this mental health packet, I'm not going to read that. Are you kidding me? And so I'm not saying this to diminish all the resources and methodologies out there for suicide prevention, but I want to highlight the lack of care, the lack of human connection, and actually talking to each other. It's become too easy to just pass off. Here are the resources. It's not my issue. I've done my part. I guess people are afraid of responsibility, of guilt, of emotional control, of a lot of different things. But when you are put into that situation, often involuntarily, sometimes people will just come to you. I had people show up at my barracks room at the middle of the night. Mr. Whiskey, I'm feeling suicidal. I need to talk to someone. And then we're up to 3, 5 a.m. I mean, sometimes it just happens, and you have to respond. I know it's not many of us feel equipped for it. But the thing is, if someone's coming to you, that already shows that you're equipped. Typically, they're not going to go to someone they don't trust or just any person. And even if it is any person, then you need to step up and be that person. You know, Suicide requires a leadership from all of us that we are capable of because that leadership skill is just listening and communicating. And so I think it's so important we get back to that humanity aspect.
Mm. Yes, I love what you just said, the humanity part. And that's one thing I think, even within my career, I experienced that towards the end was like a to disconnection from humanity and remembering like these are people that we're running calls on, but it's also people that we're working with. And this advocacy and responsibility and the leadership, like you mentioned, is this recognizing that we're all having the human experience and that it's okay to talk to someone, like to trust someone to talk to. And I think it's awesome that you became one of those people because I could tell you are a super legit guy who cares a lot about people. So I can
Thank you.
imagine there were, of course, people knocking at your door at all hours because they could tell, they know. And I think well, I want to get your perspective on this first is
All right.
what would you say directly to that person, let's say, that's struggling right now? The one that's like, I've gotten the resources, people have inundated me with the numbers and whatever, but they are still struggling. Is how could you show up for them in your humanity now? What would you want to say to them now for that person that's really in the depths of it?
So I've had several episodes on my show about suicide prevention and awareness, and Douglas Brinker, two-time suicide survivor and veteran, he said something that kind of sent a chill down my spine, which was that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary issue. And I think that reality is so important. People lose sight of that reality when they're in the midst of it. And a quote I've really grown to love recently is Dum Spiro Spero, which is Latin, and it's the tagline on the South Carolina license plates and a lot of their merchandise. It means, while I breathe, I hope. And I think they partner well together because if you commit suicide, that permanent solution, you're no longer breathing, you can no longer have hope. There is no opportunity for change. While I breathe, I hope. I really like that message because no matter what you're going through, as long as you're still alive, change can happen. Now, it may not be fast change, it may not be good change, but until you die, whether that is natural or by your own means, you have opportunity to change. And you never know when your life is going to turn around. So I always encourage, I understand suicidal ideation. I've been there myself. But what I know is that if you take your life, there is no opportunity or change for anything. And most of us don't know what's on the other side there. Whereas if you stay alive, something can happen. Maybe you get partnered up with a nonprofit. Maybe someone in your life reaches out to you. Oftentimes, something unexpected might happen toward a positive change. And again, it might not be the life you want to live at the moment, and it's hard to see it in the midst of the struggles. I've been there before, And a lot of people said, this is going to be over in the blink of an eye. And in the moment, I was like, no, this is forever. This is living hell. But looking back at so many things in my life already, I'm like, wow, we really get so tunnel visioned and so like focused on such a small amount of time that we really do lose sight of the bigger picture and the flow of time. And so I just really believe that no matter how bad life gets, as long as you're alive, change can happen. And again, it's hard to accept that change might not be what we want. But that's why the subtitle of my show is, you know, rebuilding our dreams, rebranding our lives. Because I've had a lot of dreams that I really wanted that didn't go the way I wanted them to. I've had to rebuild them. I've had to rebrand my life, and I've changed who I am and my mission and more alignment. And part of it stemmed too from I had to rebuild my dreams because my whole life my dreams were my parents' dreams that they were trying to live through me. And so I think that one amazing thing that God has given us outside of our own life is the fact that we are all creators. We were made in His image and we're all creators as well. And we have control over our life to a degree in our choices. Every day, every moment, right now, you're making the choice. And, there are consequences to that and there are benefits to that. And so I think the worst thing we could ever do is get rid of our ability to make a choice. And the only way to truly ever do that is to pass on. And so I think that stay alive because while you breathe, you can hope. And
Mm.
that hope is the fact that we can make choices and change, even if we have to, for a while, scrape by with almost nothing.
Hmm. Yeah, amazingly said. Couldn't. Yeah, I knew you were gonna have a bomb answer to it, so I just couldn't wait for you to to say it. Absolutely hope connecting back in with a purpose. Yeah, will get you through any trial or tribulation or anything going on. Absolutely. Well, this has been so much fun. I can't believe we're already to the end of time, but give us an idea of where everybody can connect with you and how we can show up and continue to support you and your mission and the work that you're doing. So tell us all the ways that you want people to connect with you.
Always like to put out my website, coupleonukes.com. That's nukes, Nukes, because I was a nuclear operator. I put for my website because it has everything you need to know. It has all my contacts, but most importantly, it has every guest who's ever been on my show, every show I've ever been on, all of their resources. So my website, it's not like a, hey, this is Mr. Whiskey. Like, there's some of that if you want to check out some good looking pictures of me. But, there's a lot of resources there for free or different programs you can look into from other guests who have been on my show, hundreds of guests all in different fields and expertises. And I really love podcasting because most shows you get to talk with people from around the world, from different walks of life, of all age ranges and all races, all genders. It is just beautiful. I've had so much, development and mind opening from it. And so my website contains all of that. It contains every one of those conversations, all of their resources and books. And I think it's just an amazing place to go and look through it. Even if you don't end up working with me or following my show, if you find something through my show or my website as a medium through which you connect with someone else, then I feel like I've done my part, right? Because being a resource provider isn't about, just your resources, it's about everyone else. Because at the end of the day, I'm not here to say my show saved XYZ amount of lives. It's about to say, well, these people came to me and they went to another show that changed their life. That's fine because the fruit and reward is that life being changed. And I've had the great honor to have people write in about how an episode of my show changed their life, and I hope to continue to see that through my show, through your show, and through everyone's show, because I think podcasting is one of the few good mediums left where we can have good, righteous people doing good work and not be part of these evil algorithms in this inundation of everything else we see. And so, coupleofnukes.com, you can find my social medias. You feel free to reach out to me on all my social medias or my email, all that information there.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, I know everyone's going to check it out, and I'm going to go check it out too because I want to see all your past guests and listen to some cool conversations. So I am 100% with you. Totally agree. So, but it was an honor, Mr. Whiskey. Like, I'm sad the conversation has to end actually, but thank you for taking the time and like, above and beyond that, thank you for putting yourself out there and for the work that you're doing. And I'm sending tons of love and support your way. And just keep on doing what you're doing and reach out. We are all here to support you. So thank you for everything that you have done and are doing. And it's just such an honor and a blessing to have you on the show today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that is a wrap. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, this conversation with Mr. Whiskey, as we talked about things, mental health, struggles in the workplace, how suicide comes up, and how important the human connection side of things really is. If you found this episode to be valuable for you, or you know someone who would really benefit from hearing this, please share this episode. We would love for the message to get out there and to just impact others. So, in a nutshell, thanks for listening. We will, of course, be listening and being with you again very soon. Like, share, subscribe. We appreciate your support so much. And thank you to Mr. Whiskey for coming on to the show. And we are excited to help support your podcast, Couple of Nukes. And everyone out there listening, go out there and have an incredible day and go make someone's day amazing. Bye.